Okay, so now we'll begin. Alex, if you could take the slide off. All right, so welcome to our session today on leveraging grievances to maintain peace and development. This session is co-sponsored by the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs and DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. One thing before we begin is if each of you who has joined us to please adjust your name to have your full name and your affiliation, just so that we know everyone who's here, and that actually if you see any familiar faces or would like to keep the conversation going after this ends, to keep doing so on the Knowledge Platform's conference page. It'll maybe keep the conversation a little bit easier to continue. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our welcome address, which will be provided by Mr. Lex Gertz. Lex Gertz is the new Deputy Director of the Directorate for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. He was most recently seconded to the World Bank as a senior advisor, and prior to that, he's held numerous positions within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including postings abroad in New York, San Francisco, and Sarajevo, as well as back in The Hague. Thanks for joining us today, Lex. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Will. And I trust that everyone can hear me. Yes, I see people nodding. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Will, for that introduction. And let me also welcome you all to this session. Very happy to see so many of you to this important session. Let me also start by thanking the Knowledge Platform as well as DCAF for organizing this session. For us as Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are very happy to be a part of this type of sharing and learning exercise between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, civil servants, international organizations, knowledge partners, and many implementing partners. So again, thank you so much for organizing this. As you might know, the Dutch involvement in the security sector reform field has fluctuated historically. Some of you might know our long-standing program in Burundi, which in the field of SSR, which we still see as one of the more successful examples of the Netherlands, the Dutch integrated approach regarding security sector reform. After that program in Burundi, our political attention on this topic became a little bit more limited, but recently we have really reinvested in this important policy theme. And for us, when we talk these days about security sector reform, we really see a move away from traditional train and equip approaches, and we really favor a move towards an emphasis on the oversight, accountability, and transparency aspects of security sector governance. To balance out perhaps the more traditional approach. And we believe that better governance of the security sector along those lines leads to improved security for and protection of people, while at the same time helping to strengthen the social contract between states and citizens and contributing to conditions for social cohesion and economic development. And in our view, a well-governed security sector can therefore really become an instrument for conflict prevention and conflict management, which ultimately contributes to sustainable development and peace. And here I would like to say a few words about our partnership with DCAF, DCAF being one of our really trusted partners in this regard, and with whom we are working on a new SDG 16 program. And that's also a reason why we are here today on this topic, discussing this with you. We see a better security sector governance as instrumental for achieving the goals set forth in the 2030 SDG agenda, to which, of course, the Netherlands has fully committed. And intrinsic to this agenda is the recognition of security as an enabler for SDG 16 principles regarding development and good governance. And in this regard, we are very happy to have a very distinguished panel from which we hear later. Of course, independent oversight bodies, such as national ombuds institutions, are really the key actors for ensuring that public and national security is provided in an effective, accountable, and transparent manner. They are also an important source of data regarding local security matters, which I also look forward to hearing more about from our distinguished panel, including our own Dutch Ombudsman. All right, well, with those remarks, I would like to take it back to you, Will. It's really great to have so much expertise on the panel today. I really look forward to this opportunity to learn from all the experiences and the best practices. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Will. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Lex, for those welcome remarks. Next, we'll have a brief welcome from Hans Born. Hans Born is the Assistant Director and Head of Policy and Research, the Head of Policy and Research Division at DCAF. He has led policy research on human rights, accountability, and security sector governance for the United Nations, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the European Parliament. The floor is now yours, Hans.
Thank you, Will. I'm slowly getting used to Zoom meetings. I instinctively unmuted myself, so I think that's also a milestone. So in better times, was it not for COVID-19, we would be all together now in The Hague and have real meetings on this topic, and lots of side meetings on 6 meters below the sea level, I guess, where The Hague is, more or less. But this is not the case. But the only silver lining is here that due to this technology, we are able to have these meetings and to span and to connect people from Latin America, Europe, and Africa together in one panel. And I'm very grateful to Lex, to your introductory remarks. That was really spot on, particularly because good governance of the security sector, oversight and accountability is key. If you only make the security sector more effective but not hold them accountable, it's like playing with fire, and it needs to be matched. And as Lex said here, play oversight institutions a big role. And we have distinguished 3 of them, which we have centralized, given center space within this project, which are Ombuds institutions, parliamentarians, and civil society organizations. For today, we focus on on Ombuds institutions as one of the key organizations dealing with receiving and investigating complaints into maladministration, human rights violations, etc. And as such, contribute Ombuds institutions to sustainable peace, which is for us, we translate it to avoid violent conflict, which is very important. But at the same time, as what Lex also said, also to connect security and stability with sustainable development. Because as we all know, and it has already been articulated by the UN and the World Bank and other actors, that countries which are in conflict, which experience violence or are very fragile, there cannot be any development. So we need to take care of that legitimate stability takes place, which means for us always also under an umbrella of democratic governance, in which Ombuds institutions play such an important role. So having this in mind, and we are very lucky to partner up here with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who sees security sector governance and reform not only as a technical issue, but also as a policy issue for policy influencing. And this is also a long-term issue. It's not only training and equip, but it's also governance and oversight connected with the wider agenda, such as sustainable development, and also to connect with these very important Ombuds institutions which exist all over the world. So having that in mind, we at DCAF, we have partnered up with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we are embarked on a 3-year project on security sector governance and sustainable development goals, in particular SDG 16. So you will find more information on this on our website, which is dcaf.ch/SDG 16. So today's session focuses on how grievances and data can create space for peace and sustainable development to flourish. And we think that Ombuds institutions have a critical role to play in contributing to peace and development. As you know, Ombuds institutions have a vast wealth of information and access to information, and also access to the wider public through their mandate to receive complaints from people regarding maladministrations or the rights being violated by government authorities. Many Ombuds institutions, I will hear more about that later, receive tens of thousands of complaints of individuals each year and engage with hundreds of thousands of citizens annually. By using this data to identify hotspots, they can serve as a sort of thermometer of society, and they can act as a early warning system. So they would one of the first ones to know when conflict is brewing and people are dissatisfied with the government, or they don't agree with policies that are spread out of the. So therefore, this is very, very important. But just as importantly, they can also proactively respond when certain sectors or regions are going off track and temperatures begin to flare up, and they can, and that's what they do, offer solutions and recommendations to how to address these problems before they become full-blown problems. So therefore, this proactive and preventative approach to resolving grievances will in turn ensure that society is more peaceful, just, and inclusive, which is the aspiration of SDG 16. So having said that, I'm looking very much forward to the discussions with our colleagues from Kenya, Costa Rica, and the Netherlands. I'm very much looking forward to debate. So thank you very much. Very great to see all the new friends again. I give the word back to you, Will.
Thanks, Hans, for those welcome remarks, and thanks, Lex, as well. We will now soon move on to our three distinguished panelists today, and we'll pose a few questions to them about how they handle grievances and gather large amounts of data, and then how that's used to improve their work. We will then have a brief intervention from my colleague at DCAF, Alexandra Preperier, to present some findings of a study that we're currently conducting to analyze reporting on the SDGs, to assess how states are currently conceptualizing the link between security and development. After that, we'll return back to the panelists for a few more questions to discuss how their work in overseeing the security sector contributes to sustainable developments in their countries. And then with the remaining time, we will have a question and answer with questions from you, the audience. A note on that, I see we have a pretty large group here, and so if each of you had a question, unfortunately we wouldn't be able to fit it in. So what we've done is we've opted to use Slido. Slido is an external website where you can submit questions, and then you can also vote on questions that have already been submitted. So if you all go to slido.com and enter the code, it's quite visible on the homepage there, KPAC, KPAC20, it'll then log you into our specific session, and there you have the opportunity to submit your own question, but also see all the questions that have been submitted by others, and the ones that you think are particularly interesting, you can like them. Then by the end of the sort of first part of the session, what we'll do is we'll then answer the questions in order of those that are the most popular, the ones that have received the most votes. So that we'll get a sort of a bit of a democratic question and answer. So if there's also instructions in the chat, so to access the chat, if it's not already on your screen, at the bottom of Zoom, you have an icon that says chat. Click on that. It'll also have in text exactly what I just instructed you. So if you forget maybe what the URL is a few minutes later, refer back to the chat there for the instructions. So now with that out of the way, we'll move on to our panelists. Our first panelist is the Honorable Florence Kajuju, who is joining us from Kenya. Honorable Kajuju is the chairperson of the Commission on Administrative Justice and Secretary General of the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association. An advocate with over 20 years experience, she holds an LLB from the University of Nairobi and postgraduate diploma from Kenya School of Law. She previously served in Parliament as the women's representative for Meru County and the vice president of the Law Society of Kenya. Florence, the first question I'll ask to you is that I've noticed in your annual reports and in other events, you've noted that your office has handled over 800,000 complaints. That's an incredible number and must yield quite a bit of insight into different problems that arise in Kenyan society. So I was wondering, how do you manage such a large caseload? And if you could give us insight into how you sort of deal with 800,000 complaints. Yeah, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. So please go ahead, Florence.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Ans, and thank you, Lex, and thank you, my colleagues, for this opportunity that we have today to be able to discuss and get to understand the issues around peace and justice and generally inclusivity in the society. Just to give a little bit of background about the Ombudsman institution in Kenya, the complaints management process in Kenya started in the year 2007 with the Public Complaints Standing Committee that was then established to be able to manage complaints from public servants. In the year 2010, we passed a constitution that then created constitutional institutions that are independent and are able to conduct the affairs of the society without undue interference from government. That is how the Office of the Commissioner of Administrative Justice was created, and it was given the mandate in 2011 to be able to receive complaints against maladministration, against issues of delay, against ineptitude, or other instances where public servants were offending or not offering public service to the citizens. We also have another mandate of access to information, where the Commission is able to ensure citizens receive information as and when demanded by the citizens, but also the public offices are able to proactively disclose information that does not threaten security or other instances where it is privileged. Having then started this process in the year 2007, we as the current commissioners took over in the year 2018. And by that time, we filed quite a number of complaints. There are so many complaints, as you've said, Will, 800,000 from the time this commission was started up to date. And there are several ways in which the Commission has been trying to deal with the issues of complaints from the citizens. One of the most, the best process that I've seen being accepted by members of the public is the alternative dispute resolution. Because the Commission is about mediation, is about negotiation, is about arbitration. How do we manage the complaints that we receive from members of the public, as opposed to the adversarial system, where you go to court and you have to undergo a process that is expensive, that is delays, and then you are not able to get the justice that you require at the speed at which you seek. What we've done is engage a lot of mediation. When there's a complaint that has been brought to us, we normally write to the offending entity and request them to give us information. If the information given then is not sufficient, or that the complainant is not satisfied with the information, then we do an inquisitorial process whereby we sit with the parties, we ask the institution that has aggrieved a complainant, we mediate the complaint, and we're able to come up with solutions at a very easy and accessible process that then does not take away lots of strength from the parties. So alternative dispute resolution has really helped us. And then we also have a corporate complaints management process that was put in place. And in this one, we sit down with the various ministries. In Kenya, we have ministries, we have departments, we have agencies, we have county governments. When we agreed that each of us as a commission and the institutions of government, government is going to appoint a liaison officer. These liaison officers then become the contact persons between the commission and the ministry or the department of the agency, such that if we have a complaint against the Ministry of Lands, then we have a contact person in the Ministry of Lands to whom the complaint is referred. And because they are within the system, then they are able to ensure that that complaint is settled within a very within a fast period. So it doesn't take so long, and that process of corporate complaints management has really helped the Commission. We've also been able to, because the Commission does performance contracting of the national government and other institutions. So we've told the institutions that we are going to ensure before we issue them with the certificate of compliance, they are able to follow up the processes of performance contracting and complaints management. So that then we twin the performance contracting and a complaints management. So an institution must be able to have settled the disputes or the complaints within the institution before we are able to issue them with a performance contracting certificate. And most of these institutions really, they desire to ensure that they get good marks when it comes to performance contracting, because then that guides them when it comes to the national debate in as far as performance is concerned of the services to the public. We also summon various government officers to come to the Commission and explain situations where we think that they have wronged the parties. The other issue is we have several commissions in this country. We have the Kenya National Human Rights Commission. We have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We work together in partnership with these institutions, because you realize that when it comes to maladministration, we believe that if you refuse to offer service to the public, then it is a way of seeking for bribes or seeking to be helped, to be able to serve the citizen. So we ensure that if a complaint has been brought to the Commission, we don't turn away the public, the citizen. We receive the complaint in the Commission, but we refer that complaint to the respective commission. If it is an issue of corruption, we'll receive the complaint in the Commission, but because we work in partnership with the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, then we forward that complaint to Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Then we follow up to make sure that we get to understand the update and the final resolution of that dispute. The same with human rights, the same with gender issues. We share, because we have a partnership with the sister commissions. But Will, one of the things that has really encouraged me in this commission is the issue of suo motu, or own motion investigations, because then you realize there are some public interest issues that affect a number of people within the communities. And we as a commission don't wait for complaints to be registered in the commission. We move on our own motion and take up an issue that has come up nationally. We do our investigations, and we also go deeper into the systemic investigations, because we realize that if the institutions are not strong enough, then that brings about failure to carry out their duties, maladministration, among other things. So when we do systemic investigations, example in prisons, we get to understand maybe that the prison officers don't have enough personnel, they don't have, they have poor working conditions, they don't have enough proper housing, and that leads to a lot of friction between themselves and the prisoners. So when we conduct systemic investigations, we are able to advise the ministry that deals with correctional services to ensure that there is a smooth flow of the system, so that now we don't have challenges in the particular institution. So that is how we are able to receive a huge number of complaints, but we ensure also we keep that data, because some of the complaints that then are brought to us, they recur, they tend to recur in every other institution. But we always come together and do a lot of training to these institutions to make them understand that the systems must work, so that now the citizens are able to get the services that they need. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Florence, for that insight. I think there was a lot of interesting points to take away from that. The importance of cooperation between other bodies that are working on similar topics. I think that's incredibly important and can often by itself lead to sort of maladministration in itself. So it's great that there's some good cooperation between the NHRI and these other institutions in Kenyan society. And your point about own motion investigations and systemic investigations is a great one, because that actually is a perfect segue to my question to Reinier van Zutphen, who's the National Ombudsman of the Netherlands. Reinier van Zutphen was appointed the National Ombudsman of the Netherlands in 2015. And after studying at the School of Law at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, he's gained extensive experience as a judge in several courts in the Netherlands and has fulfilled several international posts in Curacao and Luxembourg. He was also chairman of the Dutch Association for the Judiciary and president of the Administrative High Court for Trade and Industry. So Reinier, the question that I'll pose to you is, I noted that in your annual reports, you report anywhere between 20 and 30,000 complaints received by your office each year, which is also quite impressive and daunting. You and your staff are also very active in sort of getting out of your office in The Hague and frequently traveling around not just the Netherlands, but also the world. You visited the Caribbean islands as part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, monitoring the refugee situation in the Mediterranean and the living and safety conditions of Dutch soldiers engaged in peacekeeping missions in Mali. Does your office use data gathered from these complaints to identify site inspections and visits, and do these ever lead to own motion investigations or systemic investigations? If you could give us some insight into that, I would really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, that's a very good question, because it is said that we are on a sort of golden mountain of data as ombudsman. We know very much about what's happening in society, as Hans just pointed out. And I think that is true. But it's also very difficult to go into your own data and find out what was really going on in society. So yes, we use those 30,000 complaints yearly to find out what is really going on. And we try to sort of put those data into 5 categories, I would say. We made our own agenda. We used themes like poverty, like participation in society, like livability, like access to justice. You know, those are the broader themes on which we put our agenda for our own initiatives. Feed it by what we hear from people that phone us, write us, or email us. Those are the 30,000 signals, I would say, that we receive every year that are very useful for our work. But what we found out, and that I think that is what all ombudsmen have found out recently, or some of us already know it for a longer time, it is absolutely necessary not only to wait and sit back and lean back and wait for complaints and try to figure out what those data bring you, but you also have to go outside. You have to outreach to those who are not easily able to reach our office. You know, there is certainly now when COVID-19, we see that people who already were vulnerable became extra vulnerable, the poor, those who are out of work, those who are had a sort of, let's say, minimal brain damage or some other handicap or, you know, retardation. There are so many people that need the help of an ombudsman now and today, more than ever, I would say. And next to that, what we find out, and we work together also, like Florence explained for her country, with others, and what we find out is that those who were able to sort of help themselves out in the recent years are no longer able to do that. So our data also bring us to groups that were not in our, let's say, in our scope, that now come into the scope because of the fact that we are living now in such a worrisome time. Next to that, you mentioned the Caribbean, which is a totally different part of the world. And there is a totally different circumstance in which people live, but actually the same 5 huge themes like access to justice, poverty, education, livability, you know, those themes count there as well as they do here. The way they sort of show up is nevertheless different. And when it comes to my role as a Veterans Ombudsman, and we work together there with those facilitated very often, and luckily by DCAF, with the Germans, with the Canadians, we try to find out whether our data, the signals we receive, more or less are the same and show the same direction in where we should operate and where people are in need of our help. And when it comes to let's say the broader scope, what we try to do, and probably in the second round we can elaborate a bit more on that, We have to be seen by our own people, our own society, our own state, as a high office of importance. So the Ombudsman is an important institution on the same level as the Parliament, Council of State, Court of Auditors, the judges. In that spectrum, we have to find our place, and we can, on the basis of our data, help also the others do their work better. So yes, coming back to the question, data are important. We need to know much more about data and how to elaborate on them and how to use them. We are only starting with that. We are just finding out how important data are. And we need also an infrastructure to work with the data and to find out and to have our systems adjust to what we can do with them. The impression is that there is much more to do with the data we sit on than we are actually at this very moment using. And the same, by the way, goes for the judiciary. They also have a sort of, like the Ombudsman, they have enormous, they can have an enormous insight in what's going on in society, and we should combine that. So it's not just the Ombudsman, but it's also the other high councils, I would say, and the judiciary. They should cooperate together to tell those who are governing our country, our ministers, our parliamentary members, what is really at stake and in what direction they should act and make their policies. Well, that's for the moment.
Thanks, Reinier, for that intro, and you've also brought up, I think, some of the same points. This need for cooperation, not just with the National Human Rights Institution, but also the judiciary and other actors. I think your point also about using the data to help others do their job better is really important, and one that's especially sort of important for ombuds institutions, for an ombudsman to offer that advice on how to fix the problem. So it's one thing to identify the problem, and then it's another to then offer those recommendations on how to resolve it, so that these problems may sort of not continue recurring because of a faulty policy or law or something like that. Right. So we'll now move on to our third panelist, and that's Catalina Crespo Sancho. She's the National Ombudsman of Costa Rica, where she works ensuring that human rights are respected and at the forefront of the country's agenda. She previously was a senior gender and youth specialist working on the prevention of violent conflict at the World Bank. And she was a co-author of the World Bank and the UN's global study entitled Pathways for Peace, Inclusive Approaches to Preventing Violent Conflict. Catalina, we've had some conversations about this topic of prevention and sort of identifying problems before, and you actually were the one who sort of coined this concept of ombuds institutions as a thermometer of society. And your office has developed one of these, a system to identify these hotspots that might warrant additional scrutiny. Could you explain a bit more about how you developed this monitoring system, how it functions, and how it's sort of played out since you've begun implementing it?
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon for here. It's very early in the morning. Thank you for the invitation of being here. To start off with, it's important to know what La Defensoría, it's called La Defensoría de los Habitantes, what we do. So we do basically three things. So we ensure, as Will was saying, that human rights are being respected in the country. Second, we ensure that the public sector does and provides the services that by law that they're required. And the third one is we work on human rights education and capacity building, both with civil society, but also within the public sector. So we do a lot of capacity building within the public sector, which I think it's really important. In that way, we receive around 30,000 complaints, around 25 to 30,000 complaints, depending on the year. So what we've used is try to figure out how to get that data and organize it by who is coming, why are they coming, and from where are they coming. So what we found out is La Defensoría in the past few years, most of the people that come, almost 60% are women. And they're usually within the bracket of poverty or extreme poverty, and they come mainly from rural areas, or the second one is urban poor areas. So that's kind of who is coming from La Defensoría. And the other thing that we just added is an age bracket. So we can say that the majority of people that do come to our institution are mainly over 30, which is a problem. So we're trying to figure out, why is it that youth why is it that they don't come and complain? What's going on? Is it the access, or we're still kind of very old school in the way that we receive complaints, or what is it that, so that's something that we found out, and we're trying to figure out how to make that better. So what we found is that also through that information, through that data that we have, we also work a lot on in the field. So a lot of social dialogue, and we do a lot of mediation between different sectors and governments, between sectors themselves. So that knowledge of grievances within the field, what's going on, allows us to see more kind of what's going on, what are the perceptions, what's the credibility that different groups have, that different public institutions and the government has, and how to work that out into violence prevention. So we're starting this year working into that issue of not only the thermometer of who, why, how do we work on for example, most of the we found out that most of the complaints that we have come from several different public institutions. So we've been working on that. But this year, what we're trying to do new is working that information, that data on social dialogue and mediation and perceptions and credibility that we've had. How do we put that into violence prevention? So this year, for example, Costa Rica is obviously, the entire world is dealing with COVID, but Costa Rica is also dealing with a fiscal issue that's been going on for a few years. So COVID, fiscal, and unemployment, poverty rates going up, unemployment rates going from 12% to almost 28% nowadays. So that's, it's an issue of social discontent. And also the thermometer includes that by now, as of today, we've increased our complaints to a 33% increase in complaints. So that also says, like, okay, what's going on? Of course, those complaints are related to mostly unemployment and several issues, but there's a red light, like, careful. And the other thing that we've figured out, and we've have it completely organized into data sets, is every time we do mediation with different groups, we try to figure out what were the results? What did government do, or what did they not do? So the issue of credibility, which can affect obviously grievances, and it can affect the social issues around. We figured out that that in this case specifically, in Costa Rican case, the government who's in right now says something, doesn't fully address what they said they were going to do. So that credibility is going back. So now that there's all this social discontent, and we've had in the past 2 weeks gatherings and police and yeah, it's been a little crazy here. So that lack of credibility increases the sense of perception that the government is not doing what they're supposed to do, and the grievances just grow. And based on the work of many other conflict specialists or academics, we can see that when these grievances get together and the groups start getting together, and organized groups, they're organizing between groups, different groups are organized, that can increase the possibility of violence. So that's what's going on here. The other issue is the use of data responsibly. Costa Rica, right, and this year in February, we had a big issue related to how data was being used in the public sector was everything was concentrated within the executive branch, and it's not clear how that data was being used. So La Defensoría, my institution, went and said, okay, you have to be, there's an issue of confidentiality, there's an issue of people's personal information that it can't be used for every purpose. So for public, for use of public goods, that could be good. But in the moment that this data can be used for other issues and related to more on how elites, political elites, can use that information for other uses, which can, and we've used them, we've seen them used in other countries as, for example, elections. So by law, you can't use that information here in Costa Rica. I know other countries are more lax with those. So that's another issue that we've kind of seen, that data is really good when you use it when it's not somebody's name, but when you have that access to, depending on what you're going to use it for, it can be used for good or it can be used for other purposes that can be more interesting. So that in general, it's what we're working on related to thermometer.
Thanks, Catalina. That was really interesting and a lot of points to take away from this as well. How you also identify what is your base, but then also who isn't represented in that, and how you mentioned youth is underrepresented, and then thinking about ways to sort of overcome some of those maybe perceptions amongst the youth, or maybe different ways to reach out to the youth is a really interesting way to look, beyond just who's coming to you and how to deal with their problems, but how to sort of engage with others, that especially perhaps those vulnerable groups that Reinier was mentioning earlier. One thing I found it quite impressive that you've increased your complaints by 33%. I think many people might hear complaints are increasing, which means something's going wrong. But I think it's also important to stress that I don't think it's necessarily that there are more problems in society. It's just that people are maybe more aware of your office's role in resolving complaints. And so it should be seen that complaints are actually a good thing. People trust the system and trust the tools at their disposal to resolve their complaints, rather than sort of becoming further discontented and having no means of recourse to resolve these issues. So an increase in complaints, I think, should be seen as a good thing and not a bad thing. It doesn't mean more problems are coming. People are just more comfortable sort of going through official means to resolve them. One reminder, if any of you have in the audience have any questions, please submit them through Slido. I see there's already 4 or 5 questions, or actually a bit more than that have been submitted. And so please go there, submit your question, and be sure to like questions that you think are also quite good. I see some people have been doing it already, but it can't hurt to have even a larger sample to choose from. So now we will move on to a very brief intervention from my colleague Alexandra Preperier, who's been analyzing the voluntary national reviews, which are the way for states to report on their implementation with the SDGs, to see how they're currently providing data to demonstrate progress in implementing the SDGs, and then what link they've made to date with ombuds institutions and the security sector within these reports. So Alexandra, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Will. As you mentioned earlier, in the context of a larger project on SDG 16, DCAF is currently conducting an analysis of the voluntary national reviews, the VNRs. The VNRs are a central part of the follow-up and review process of the 2030 agenda. They allow states to inform on national progress made towards the realization of the SDGs, and permits the sharing of experiences as well as joint learning, including on challenges and lessons learned, with a view to accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda. As their name indicates, the VNRs are voluntary. They're also state-led, and the process is encouraged to be inclusive, involving multiple stakeholders. Countries present the VNRs at the high-level political forum, the HLPF, that takes place annually. And keeping with the theme we've just discussed of harnessing data to make more informed decisions, these VNRs represent a large source of information. So for the period 2016 to 2019, the VNRs presented contained several thousand pages of information. And this data source hasn't before been thoroughly analyzed in how it relates to security sector governance and reform. The aim of the study that DCAF is conducting is to examine how VNRs engage on SSGR and to what extent SSGR is used as a policy tool to address the interlinkages between security and sustainable development in the context of the 2030 Agenda. The research focuses on 152 VNRs produced between 2016 and 2019, so it doesn't cover the VNRs that were presented at this year's HLPF. And today I'll present some of the preliminary findings of the analysis. Let me start by mentioning how SSGR is addressed in the VNRs. The SSGR terminology is largely absent from the reviews. There's no reference to the terms security sector governance or SSG. Only 5 countries make reference to security sector reform or SSR in their reviews. Belgium, the Central African Republic, Guinea, Norway, and Timor-Leste all mention SSR in the context of SDG 16, either to report on national processes or regarding the support to SSR programs abroad. So only a handful of VNRs use the SSGR terminology to make explicit use of it in their reviews. But what we also see about the way in which SSR is reported on is that a number of VNRs do make reference to SSR activities, even though they do not explicitly refer to them as such. A few examples are the case of Indonesia's 2019 VNR, which identifies as a key policy for the realization of SDG 16 to enhance the transparency and accountability of its law enforcement sector. And the case of Tanzania, which points to efforts towards engaging in community policing. Now, turning to the topic that has brought all of us here today, I'd like to briefly mention the role of Ombuds institutions in the VNRs. As has been mentioned previously, Ombuds institutions exert an essential function in overseeing national security sectors. And I just want to provide here a few examples of this role that can be found in the VNRs. Ghana, for instance, points to the work of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice in monitoring detention facilities, including prisons and police cells. And Timor-Leste mentions that its National Human Rights Institution has been providing trainings on human rights to both the police and the army since 2014 and 2018, respectively. These two examples are illustrative of the variety of context-specific policies that can be undertaken by Ombuds institutions to hold national security sectors accountable in line with the good governance ambitions of SDG 16. Nevertheless, the number of such examples seem to be relatively limited in the VNRs, and greater emphasis should be placed on this function and reported on in future reviews. So to conclude and to sum up the two preliminary findings at this stage of the analysis and that I've presented today, only a few countries make explicit reference to SSGR, but we also see examples of some VNRs that refer to efforts in conducting SSR activities, even if these efforts are not necessarily labeled as SSR. And second, a number of examples can be found in the VNRs linking Ombuds institutions and the security sector, but greater emphasis should be placed on their role as oversight actors and reported on in the VNRs. We hope that events like these will continue to raise the profile of Ombuds institutions and lead to more recognition to the role that they can play in providing data-based evidence, but also in effectively overseeing security actors. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra, for that information. Just notes on the order. We are running a bit over time at this point, so I may put our speakers on the spot and actually ask each of them if they could give us insights into how you are aligning your work with the Sustainable Development Goals. And to answer with 1 or 2 minutes at most, because we want to give plenty of space for the participants to have their questions answered. So first, maybe I'll go to Reinier. How has the National Ombudsman of the Netherlands begun thinking about, or how has it already to date begun aligning its work with the SDGs? And do you see a role for your office to play in that?
Thank you so much. Yeah, 1 or 2 minutes. Let's start. They are very important. Many countries have committed to these goals. That's an important part. So does my government. My country also adheres to the 17 goals. So we use them as something to point out to our government, you contracted, I would say, the United Nations on this. We want to see that you make progress. But we do not do that as a sort of oversight or monitor. What we try to do is, in our daily work, in our individual cases, in our systemic investigations, to show where and when some of these SDGs are important. Actually, we do it more or less in the same way as we deal with human rights. You will not find in each report articles or particular paragraphs of the Human Rights Convention. When you read through our reports, you see that human rights is a source of inspiration, and so are the SDGs. Nevertheless, in some reports, we explicitly mentioned, for example, combating poverty in the Caribbean, on the Caribbean islands, clean water and sanitary facilitations, also in the Caribbean. But also internet is important, access to education. So from time to time, we try to underscore and underline how important it is that these goals are part of, let's say, first in mind of our governments when they act. So we are not the ones who are very deep into the SDGs. We use them. We show what they can mean for people that come to the Ombudsman with complaints and problems. And we try to show our governments how to use the goals to achieve those, those better living standards. And in the end, we always want to go back to our own position. We are there to say whether or not the governments and the government agencies and civil servants have really acted in an appropriate way. That's what it is, and about good governance. So we always return to that because that is where we feel our own strength, and SDGs are, well, you could say, another instrument in our office that we from time to time use, and where you can see that it from time to time also helps to pick out number 1 or to use number 10 or to position ourselves as a strong institution under the 16.3 and 16.6. I think it's important that we ourselves are aware of the fact that we also must be strong, a strong institution ourselves by the way we work, by the way we are seen by society. And there we have a lot of work to do. So it is certainly number 16, because that's about ourselves. And we must show that we are able to be strong and that we are able to influence and that we are able to do what for people in need in our countries. And next to that, from time to time, we use the other ones. Is that just in time?
Yep, that's great, Reinier. Yeah, your point about...
There's much more to say about it, but this is, in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I hope in the question and answer we'll actually be able to touch on some more of these points. But I think what you said about how 16 is something for you, and then you can then with that, it empowers you to sort of, look out for the other goals. We often talk about how 16 is a sort of enabler or a sort of accelerator, or it has a sort of catalytic effect for the other goals. In that if you have strong institutions that are transparent, effective, and accountable, often that will have knock-on effects for other goals like poverty reduction or increasing education and other matters. And so, if you can do 16 well, you hopefully can do many of the other goals well as well.
Right.
So Catalina, I'll move to you, and if you could answer the same question. How does your office engage with the SDGs? Have you done it to date? Have you engaged with them, and do you see a role for your office to play in engaging with the SDGs?
Thank you. So I'm going to try to make this as short as possible. So we've decided to work on the SDGs, but specifically on SDG 16, working on peace, justice, and strong institutions. So our report, our annual report last year was based on this SDG 16 and how all our work fits into those 3 areas, but also our 4-year strategy. While I'm here as part of the as the ombudsperson, it's a 4-year position. So the 4-year strategy is also based on that SDG 16. So we have 3 main areas of work that we're going to be working on, that we've been working on, and I still have 2 more years to keep on working on it. It's institutions, and that the data gives us which institutions we are prioritizing based on how many complaints we get. The second is poverty and inequality. And the third one is polarization and exclusion. So as you can see, those 3 relate to SDG 16, but they're made into the work that we do here. So one of the things that we are working really strong out of those 3 issues or 3 points of strategy, we're working on strengthening institutions. So that's going to be our main work, mainly because in the past 10 years, Costa Rica has been losing the credibility of public institutions. And that, as we all know, that's a big problem, a huge problem for violence prevention. So that's basically how we're doing SDG 16 in our report and also in our 4-year strategy.
Thanks, Catalina, and also for sticking to the time restrictions that I've just imposed. Florence, maybe I'll pass the same question to you. How does your office work with the SDGs? Does it have a role? Is it already working on the SDGs? Please.
Thank you. It's good to report that the SDGs have been part and parcel of the Ombudsman institution. And we are glad to report again that because we play an oversight role in ensuring that the national government and the county governments are accountable to the people, then we also want to make sure that we build strong institutions. Because you can have institutions, but as long as they don't play the role that they're supposed to play, then those institutions will not be able to support the citizens that are supposed to be supported. One of the things that we do as a country is to ensure that in the State of the Nation address that the President gives every year, he reports to the Parliament on what exactly he has done as in his government to ensure that he follows up the international conventions, because in our constitution, the international conventions have been ratified. And once ratified, then they become part and parcel of the programs that must be followed in our government. One of the other things that we have done is to ensure that service delivery is important to the people and is given. We've spoken about this before in terms of the security sector, to ensure that we set up a military ombudsman that is able to take charge of peace and justice in the country. And these are some of the things that we've done, Will. Also, we've also ensured that in the course of our work, there's a lot of mediation programs that are effected, because we realize that especially with COVID-19, the citizens were not able to access information, they were not able to access justice, neither were they accessing services. So we came up with programs that brought all these teams together to be able to speak to them and ensure there's transparency in the way in which the Ministry of Health was supporting the public, was giving out education to the people. And we've also tried to train the citizens of this country to be able to seek for information, especially when there is issue of corruption or lack of transparency in as far as the SDGs are concerned. But our key desire is to ensure that the institutions that we built through the constitution that we have remain strong and they deliver the services that they must to the people.
Thank you, Florence, for those remarks. I see that we are actually right now at the end of our time slot. I do recognize that there is 15 minutes between the formal conclusion of this time slot and the start of the next ones. So I understand if people need a break between now and the next sessions as part of the conference, but if I can sort of take my liberties as moderator, we will still take a couple questions from the audience that have been submitted. So I understand if you all have to leave, feel free to depart. That's also sort of the beauty of these virtual meetings. You don't have to stand up and walk across the room in front of everyone. You can quietly, click the leave button. But we do encourage you to stay for these questions because many of them came from you. The most up, I see we have 3 questions that have been the sort of most popular. What I'll do is I will pose all 3 of them, and we'll go through each speaker. You can pick and choose which ones maybe you have something to say on, and I'll do a sort of reverse order of that last question. So the first question that is at the top of the list is, has your office been consulted when your country has drafted its voluntary national review? The second question, actually, which is specifically for Catalina. Catalina, when you aligned your annual report with the SDGs, did it receive much attention in Costa Rica? And then the next question, which is another general question for everyone, is how do you safeguard privacy? How is it reported against the SDGs as it's the government, or as the government is responsible to report on it? Lodging grievances need proper attention and true investigation. So Florence, maybe I will ask you to start in responding. And again, please try and limit your remarks to just a couple minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. On the issue of public participation, our country has been keen on ensuring that there's public participation in most of the issues that have arisen. I think what we have in this country is a very informed society. And the laws that have been passed allow citizens to come in and seek for information. So we've seen that in instances where the issues that have arisen, especially that affect members of the public and the citizens, there's always been that demand for information. And that we always encourage public participation. And I report that the Boost institution in Kenya is one of the institutions that has always been consulted, especially because in the Commission on Administrative Justice Act, we are supposed to advise government. We issue advisory opinions. So whenever an issue arises, we are supposed to give advisory opinions or our thinking to government so that they're able to pick it up and run with it.
Thank you, Florence. Next, I'll go to Catalina. If you could also address some of these questions.
Sure, thanks. In relation to the question about did it receive much attention, the report, locally it didn't, but well, I think within ombuds institutions and international organizations, I think it got more attention. But also, I wanted to share that we used a framework that NYU has for using SDG 16. So that's a framework that we utilized. That was actually a really good one in order to put our report. On the issue of information privacy, I think that's a huge issue that, of course, internet and all these the social platforms have opened up. And a part of human rights is that we, our work is also to protect the sensitive information that people have, and also how that information is being used. So we're just starting with that. Of course, it's the country doesn't have a lot of experience with that. But we're as a ombudsman institution, we're trying to put we're trying to control is not the right word. We're trying to bring awareness to that issue.
Thanks, Catalina, for those remarks. Interesting that maybe it received a bit more attention internationally. I was pretty impressed with it, if that counts. The last speaker, Reinier, I was wondering if you would like to respond to any of these questions. Sorry, Reinier, you are muted right now.
I'm unmuted now. On the topic of privacy, Of course, there is the standards within Europe when it comes to data protection, and we adhere to those principles. But we also try to tell other government bodies that they also should be in line with data protection. We never give the data of our complainants. We never give data in detail. On our website, you will never be able to find out who was complaining, etc., etc. So there is anonymity. But it's more than that. It's not just anonymity. It is the way you deal with the data you have in your systems. So the protection is very important, and what we try to do is, with our data protection authority, work together on what is a good way for governments to deal with the data they have of their own citizens. Which is not an easy job, I must tell you, because, you know, when different high councils are working together, from time to time you come into some sort of problem of definition or of competence or whatever. But when you start with the actual things that people tell us about, the fear they have that their data are misused, then you come quite a number of cases across that can help to protect better the data of the people. And it is important because in relation to the first topic we had, how do we sit on our own data? We have to be sure that we protect the people and tell them that their data will not be abused or misused by our own office. And when it comes to public participation, what we try to do in our work is not just have it, let's say, in good order on paper, that you have the possibility by law to participate or to tell your own story when it comes to a new law or new plans in your municipality or whatever it is, but that it is something actually seen as a real participation, that you can join, that you can be active and not only be listened to and then say, okay, now we listen to what you had to say and we can go on with the process. Participation is not just giving the opportunity. Participation is actively from governments get their citizens into a sort of active mode that they will take responsibility for what's happening in their house, street, suburb, whatever it is. So participation is much more than just on paper arranging for moments there where people can tell what their views on new developments are. It is having people actively involved in exploring and executing those new plans.
Great, thanks, Reinier. A lot of interesting points, and I wish we had a bit more time to discuss these in a bit more detail. I certainly have many more questions, and unfortunately, there's still many more questions in the queue that we weren't able to address. But to not disrupt the flow of the conference schedule too much, we'll wrap it up here. One thing that the knowledge platform organizers have asked us to do is to do a sort of group photo. So a huge thanks to all of you who are still with us. We still have most of the people who started, who are here from the start. But if you could each turn your camera on. What we'll do is take a few screenshots. I guess everyone can wave to the screen. I think the knowledge platform will make a compilation video of this at the end of it. So I'll just give another few seconds for everyone to turn on their cameras. You're not obligated, of course, but we do invite you to do so. And so if everyone could wave to the screen at the same time. Great. Thanks for helping us out with that. And thanks to all of you for attending, staying several minutes overtime. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And a special thanks to Hans and Lex for their welcome remarks, but especially to Catalina, to Reinier, and to Florence for their very interesting remarks. I really enjoyed this panel, and maybe I guess we can do our reactions, a virtual clap in Zoom. So thanks to all of you again for coming. Have a wonderful rest of your day, however long that is, wherever you are. And let's remain in touch through the annual conference for the rest of the next day or so. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.